I guess girls. Not even like women, but girls more. I think of like when I was little, more like little girls.
When I hear the word femininity, then I think of like the 1950s housewife, you know, sort of always wears dresses, has like a certain character to those people that identify as feminine, you know, like wears blush and all of that.
I guess just automatically I think confused, because for me, like, femininity can be really complex, and it's very different for people in this country between like cultures, and even though like I identify as a cisgender woman, sometimes it's hard for me to like feel effeminate or know what it means to necessarily be feminine.
Less so, I feel like when like you're grown up, it's less like about being feminine and more just a woman. I don't know exactly why, or how, I mean, but.
It's a mix of traits that you do while you are in a social situation, to your appearance, but also it's how society treats you regardless of that, to which there are people that don't want to identify as feminine, but because of society they're forced into that box anyways, and then are judged because they don't fit into that box.
Just like anger.
When I hear the word masculinity, I initially think of toxic masculinity. This is the set of rules imposed on those that identify as masculine, but more so than just what regular masculinity is. This is like the whole, my dick is bigger than yours sort of thing. And it leads to those who identify as masculine having like a hurt image. Of course, they'd never admit to that because that's one of the rules of masculinity, or toxic masculinity.
In that case, men. Which is kind of funny. But yeah, like really strong grown-up man.
Or less towards masculine identified people and more like towards the concept in general. Because I know a lot of male identifying people that really struggle with the concept of masculinity and what it means for them to be a man or a boy.
Feel like can't express their emotions. I have a very close friend that Connor, you know,
yeah,
who was like, I don't know the last time I cried, because he's like, I felt like guys, he said that he felt as if guys couldn't cry, so that type of thing. People is the word I think of.
When I hear the word transgender, I think of the word validity, because society has a lot of self-imposed rules on those that are transgender, like, oh, you're not a real transgender person, or also same thing with genderqueer people. If you don't do these certain things, like you can't be a real trans woman if you don't wear the clothes, or if you don't, you know, transition to it. So like there's sort of an importance put to like align yourself with, I guess a good word would be stereotype of what it is to be transgender, which of course is also harmful when talking about it. So I think it's important to reaffirm and validate those that are transgender, because there's a lot of self-imposed rules.
Just like sympathetic, I guess, would be my best word, because only very recently have I been more like exposed to trans people and like what they really go through, and I'm just right now kind of exposing myself more to the ideas of what it means to be transgender, and just trying to be supportive in the midst of the climate that we're in right now.
Hey look, it's me.
I think that non-binary is a fairly new identity in terms of being like expressed in our culture, and I think a lot of people are confused as to what that is and what it means, and so it's complicated because there's not a lot of awareness.
This is due to a wide variety of things, like the preferences that I have in regards to how I dress are different than, say, a male would, or the traditional cis male would, whereas like I like to wear traditionally feminine clothes, and I like to do things that are traditionally feminine, whereas those aren't associated with masculinity. Of course, there's the whole topic of then what is a gender in the first place, but genderqueer, I feel, relates to me in particular because it's not of the binary, and when I look at what the traditional male is and what the traditional female is, neither of those align with me.
I just never understood why someone would call anyone that, even just on a playful level.
It is a term that I was called even before I realized that I was queer, so that's fun. And I realized that I don't have a particular word for it. I realize that it is being reclaimed, although primarily it's used by outsiders in an offensive sense, although I realize that there are those, primarily those that identify as gay, that are reclaiming it.
Negative, I mean, I know I've had friends throughout high school and junior high and stuff who, if they were assumed a certain way, it was usually like skinny and more feminine. It was used on them even if it had nothing to do with their sexuality.
Can gay be my reaction to that word?
I was 14, my hair was really short. Just in the middle of class, a kid called me that, and like no one did anything but me.
Usually it's used against people who identify as lesbian as something sort of butch, but like more offensive. But I know that more people are reclaiming it, so.
For me, dyke is a less strong word as opposed to like faggot. And I think that's because there's a lot of lesbian reclaiming of that word. And so when I think of dykes, I think of strong, lesbian, butch women who are out and they're fighting, and like, that is what dyke is to me. Dyke isn't a demeaning word so much as it's a word that's trying to be reclaimed. Same. You know, like... that's how
Hey look, it's me!
I never had really heard it until I was in like library or something when I was in elementary school, and our library teacher was reading us a book and was like getting to a part and was like, it means odd, before she said the word. And that's, my mom had used it in that sense all like when I was little, like, oh, something's really like different or odd, and never in the sense of like the LGBT stuff, and people like laughed and I was like, I don't get it. But I guess that's when I figured it out. I
identify as queer, although I realize that it in itself has been used as a very offensive term since at least the 60s, according to my grandmother. But I use it because it's in my gender identity, genderqueer. So in itself, I realize that there are still parts of the US and the world in which it is used very offensively, to sort of cover anyone who appears or identifies as LGBT plus. So yeah.
Been reclaimed recently, but like long enough ago that like the generation that I'm a part of, like, you know, a lot of us identify as queer, and queer is a really strong word and a really blanket term, and in that way, like, anyone within the LGBTQ community can identify as queer, and it doesn't have to be, it can be this blanket term that can apply to anybody. Charged.
Microaggressions, because it's something that through society people are sort of almost trained to do, and they don't realize that they're doing them, but towards a group of people, then it can be violent to them. Because yeah, it might be the equivalent of getting a paper cut, but if you have 1,000 paper cuts a day, you're gonna pretty much hate yourself and everything associated. So
people feel like they can't stand up for someone of a different race because they're not their race, and I don't necessarily think that that's accurate. And I wish that we would just address race problems instead of being afraid of what people will think if we do address them. Just like hate.
Somewhat violent. Like, I honestly, like, I would punch him in the face. Like, I just...
Donald Trump is like the symbol of America's shit. And I hate that he is our leader right now, and I hate that the rest of the world looks at us and sees Trump and sees how much of a shithole the US is right now.
Change. And the reason that I think that is because activism is something that is supposed to create change. The idea behind it is usually in a more progressive manner, although I realize that activism can take effects in various other ways. Primarily, activism is supposed to reach a goal that is better for society as a whole, though. At least that's how I see it.
Strong. Because for me, like, activism is about standing up for what you believe in and what you want to change in the world, and whether that's on a broad societal level or within just your own, like, household. I think activism is about being strong.
Protesting is the first one I think of. That's the first type of activism I think of. But I know that lobbying and writing's a form of activism. Making things in favor of what you want to change.
Important. Identity allows people to come together, and even though a lot of times people use each other's identities to separate each other and become distinct, I think it's also important for especially like minority groups to have identities and have some way to claim themselves as outside of the majority.